Hey, welcome back to the Church of the Revolution YouTube channel. My name is Charlie, and I am the Commie preacher. Here at the Church of the Revolution, we preach one message: Jesus was a communist, and so should you. Thanks to Stephen Colbert for that. So it's been a couple of weeks, if not 3 weeks, since I did a video, and I apologize for all of my subscribers. I even lost one in that period of time because I was busy. I am a professional minister. I work for a church. I preached for them twice in the past few weeks, and then I preached for another congregation, which I do on occasion, and probably will do more as the year progresses. Because I am a working minister, I do have to try to make a living at this thing called ministry, which is a bit of a contradiction. Why would a commie preacher want to have an income? Because I don't want to starve. And I think we all have to work. And communism has never been about not working or making an income. It has always been about how the system of capitalism devalues the work and the labor that we do, and what we want is for one, to benefit those who work the hardest, and two, to benefit everyone relatively equally. That there not be huge disparities of wealth and poverty, and that's what communism is about. So today, I called this video, What's in a Resurrection? Yesterday was April 4th, here in the United States, 2021, which is the Western calendar date for Easter. Of course, the Eastern calendar, Easter will happen, I believe, next Sunday. So in a sense, if you're in the East, you get to watch this video before Easter actually happens. But I think there's a benefit of still doing this video after Easter, because the resurrection of Jesus is probably the most complicated, most unbelievable claim that the early Christians made. And understanding that helps us understand more about what it meant to say Jesus was a communist, and for the early followers of Jesus to say he was the Christ, the Messiah. That's really important. Now, here at the Church of the Revolution, we say he was a communist. We don't say he was the Messiah. We don't say he was the Christ. If you believe Jesus was the Christ, or if you believe Jesus was the Messiah, you're welcome to that belief. But here at the Church of the Resurrection, we don't assume any of the standard definitions of Christ or Messiah as applied to Jesus of Nazareth. We reserve the term Messiah specifically for the Messiah of the Jewish people, which is actually a collective liberation of the people. And that's what I'm going to get into today. What was the collective characteristics of the resurrection? We often think of the resurrection as an event that happened to Jesus, and then further as an event that will happen to all the other followers of Jesus. They will be resurrected from the dead. We're going to dig into what else is going on in this story of the resurrection. What is going on that we miss with the story of individuals being brought back from the dead and their bodies being transformed into some kind of immortality? So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to talk about the two stories of Jesus that we have competing in the 21st century between Jesus, the sacrificial lamb who died for the sins of the world, versus Jesus, the communist rebel who died trying to transform the world and gave the world a message of liberation, of revolution, and of communism. Those are the two stories, and they are opposed. Now, some people will say, and you're welcome, if you still believe in this personal sacrifice for your sins and that you're going to die and go to heaven because you believe certain things about Jesus, I can't say you're absolutely wrong, because that would assume something that I don't know. I do think that framing of the Jesus story is unhelpful. And in fact, in my life and in the life of many other people I know, that story has actually been harmful, because it teaches that we are sinners in need of a salvation, that God is so angry at each member of the human race for disobeying some moral principle that God established from eternity past, that God is rightfully condemning all of humanity to an eternal, conscious torment in the flames of hell. I may deal with hell in this episode today, but what I want to emphasize right here is that hell is not what you think it is. Hell is not what the Western Catholic Church has been teaching since the time of Augustine and other earlier people than Augustine, who said that the wicked will be tormented consciously, eternally, forever. That simply makes literally no sense, because why would a good and loving, all-powerful God, assuming that we believe in such a being, why would that being want to torment any of the humans that have been created? Even Hitler. Would you want to torment Hitler for an infinity? I say torment him for about 6 billion lifetimes. Actually, make that 20 billion lifetimes, because that's the level of suffering. And at the end of that 20 billion lifetimes, if he's turned around, if he's changed his heart, if he's no longer wants to destroy the lives of billions of people, or millions of people, sorry, not 20 billion, 20 million. if Hitler no longer wants to torment every human being, and that isn't an Aryan, isn't a Nazi, then let him in. Jesus said that the first shall be last. That means the powerful, the wealthy, the Hitlers of this world, they'll be last. They've already had all of the benefits of a human life, and they abused those horribly by hurting as many people as they possibly could. Hitler fits that example more than anyone. He's last. Hitler is at the end of the damn line into the kingdom of heaven, which is on earth. The kingdom of heaven is on earth. It isn't on a far-off planet. You've heard me say that multiple times if you've listened to my other videos. So what is the resurrection? We're going to get into that. And the way we're going to get into that is through the prophet Ezekiel. Now, I have done all my research here, folks. This was a sermon that I prepared very carefully. I did all my research into Ezekiel. Why did I research into Ezekiel? Because Ezekiel gives us a prophecy in the 37th chapter of the book of Ezekiel called the Valley of the Dry Bones. And it appears in the first 14 or 15 verses of this chapter. Actually, I think it's only 14. And he talks about resurrection. In fact, this is probably the first resurrection story in Jewish scripture. And he's not talking about anybody coming back from the dead, but any one person coming back from the dead. So let me read you let me read you the prophecy in my own paraphrase. Ezekiel felt that God had seized him. A heavenly wind carried him and set Ezekiel down in the middle of an open plain that was strewn with bones. And this wind led him among the bones, so many dry bones, all over the plain, bleached by the sun. And he heard a voice ask him, "Human one, can these bones ever live again?" Ezekiel answered, "Well, only God would know that." The voice then said to Ezekiel, "Prophesy over these bones. Dry bones, listen to the message of God. I'm bringing the breath of life to you. You shall return to life. I will attach sinews to you, put meat on your bones, cover you with skin, and breathe life into you. You shall come alive, and you will know the power of the source of creation." As Ezekiel said those words, there was a rustling sound, and the bones moved, and they came together, bone connecting to bone, sinews forming, then muscles on the bones, then skin stretched over them, and yet they still did not have any life. Ezekiel heard the voice again, "Prophesy to the atmosphere, to the four winds of the earth. Tell the winds to blow upon these dead bodies, these slain bodies. Breathe life into them." Ezekiel spoke those words. The winds entered the body, and they all came alive, stood up on their feet the size of a great army. The voice spoke again to Ezekiel. "These bones are the whole house of Israel. The Jewish people have been saying, our bones are dried up. Our hope is gone. There's nothing left of us. Tell them your graves will be opened and the people will come back up to life. You will return to the land of Israel. So what is this vision about? This vision is about the people of Israel. And where was Ezekiel when this was being spoken? He spoke this vision, this prophecy, in a foreign country. I believe it was Persia, because the Persian emperor had attacked Jerusalem, captured their king, captured slaves, and pulled them off and carried them back to Persia to serve the king. And Ezekiel was speaking to the hopelessness of that situation of enslavement. Our bones are dried up. Our hope is gone. There is nothing left of us. Tell them, your graves will be opened and the people will come back to life. Now let me read from a Mennonite scholar by the name of Millard Lind, wrote a commentary on this book, the entire book of Ezekiel, but here's what he says about this passage. People who know very little about Ezekiel otherwise, nevertheless, can chant the refrain, Ezekiel saw the wheel, or the leg bone connected to the hip bone. The powerful images of this chapter attract the attention of artists, songwriters, and poets from the pre-Christian era all the way to the present. Modern scholars and interpreters generally agree that this vision is not about literal resurrection of dead bones or of Israelites. Instead, it is about the renewal of Israel's life as a collective and the return to their home. The vision doesn't describe a mere resuscitation of life which continues on the same level, but rather a genuine resurrection of life from an old to a different order. Resurrection is the means by which a renewed community with a new heart, a new spirit, a new breath, a new wind, living in a renewed land with new leaders coming into being. And the vision is, of course, inspired and occasioned for Ezekiel by the despair of those in exile and enslavement. Our bones are dried up. Our hope is lost. We're cut off completely. This vision may have even been of a battlefield. Perhaps the prophet indicates by this that the Jewish people have been defeated on the plane of world history. The nations have conquered Israel. And these bones of the house of Israel, though not physically dead, their political plight is regarded as if it were death, a descent to the pit, cut off, just as disasters are named elsewhere in the Hebrew scripture. The prophet is commanded to address these bones, their spirit, breath, and finally the people themselves. And he begins not by belittling their pessimism and despair, but by confirming it. The prophet speaks of their graves as if there's a trench in the ground or a tomb cut in a hillside. But in this despair, there is hope yet because of God. Note the repetition of the resurrection statement. When I open your graves and bring you up, this repetition is united with the covenant formula, my people. The resurrection will happen because God will not forget this covenant relationship. This new act of God includes the promise of land and includes this promise, I will put my own spirit, the spirit of the creative source of all existence. Go back to my conversation about God and goddess and the radical goddess. It's not this parochial God of Israel that is saying this, but rather the spirit of creation, of evolution, the spirit of evolution, the spirit of that brought the earth into being itself, that is speaking within human beings. The resurrection is not merely a resuscitation and continuation of old relationships in the old land. It's an elevation instead for all of us to a new plane of life. And I want to bring this hope to you. We are living here in the shadow of a climate catastrophe, in the shadow of economic inequality greater than I've seen in my whole lifetime. And I've been around since 1963. And very few things that really matter have gotten better. Yes, we have won some victories, and I'll talk about those as I move into the sermon later. But right now, I want to bring some hope into your lives. And I'm going to do it with a song. And the song is the South African freedom anthem, Freedom is Coming. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know. Oh, yes, I know. Oh, yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know. Oh, Jesus, Jesus is coming. Oh, Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. Oh, yes, oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know. Oh, yes, I know. Oh, yes, I know. Oh, yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know. This message of resurrection is not about anybody's individual body being brought back from the dead, although that may happen. I can imagine technology that could bring me back from the dead, and all of us. No, rather it is about the revolution. It is about the arrival of communism on earth, about the messianic age that the Jewish prophets believed in, an age of prosperity, an age of global abundance. That is the resurrection. So let's turn to Jesus. I sang that song, Freedom is Coming, Jesus is Coming. And again, here at the Church of the Resurrection, we do not intend to preach the message that Jesus was Christ or Messiah. We preach that Jesus was a messianic figure, but he was not the Messiah, because in his lifetime and in the aftermath of his lifetime, the messianic kingdom, communism, did not arrive. So we don't believe that we don't preach that he is Christ or Messiah in any sense that was recognizable to the rest of the world. If you believe Jesus is the Christ, if you believe he is the Messiah, that's your private, personal belief, and it is shared by millions of Christians. But here, Church of the Revolution, we are a universalist project of ministry. We are reaching out to everyone, whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or atheist, whatever, Buddhist, Hindu, doesn't matter. We are reaching out to the message that Jesus was a communist, and that what we need to live for is this resurrection moment when communism triumphs over the death systems of our current reality. And this is the message of Jesus of Nazareth. And here we go. We're going to now turn to Luke chapter 6, starting at verse 17 to 26. And this is the beginning of what I have come to call the Galilean Uprising. Jesus came down off the mountain with his organizers, and he stood on a plain surrounded by them. And they soon were then added by a gathering from all over Judea and Jerusalem, from the seaside towns of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him, as well as to receive healing and care for their bodily suffering. Those disturbed by traumatic experiences, possessed by demons, traumatic experiences is what demons are, they were given support by Jesus. Everyone was trying to touch Jesus, who gave his whole people, everyone there, his deepest healing, empathy, and compassion. Finally, Jesus raised his eyes to all of them and said, "Wholeness is arriving for the impoverished, for the divine regime belongs to them. Wholeness is arriving for the malnourished and starving, because a divine feast belongs to them. Wholeness arrives for those who are grieving, suffering, and mourning, for divine joyfulness belongs to them. Wholeness will arrive for all, even when Everyone hates you, rejects you, insults you, condemns your name as evil because you hold to the coming liberation, the coming revolution. Rejoice when that happens. Leap for joy because the universal reward will outstrip every suffering you've ever had. Through the ages, oppressors have always attacked the messengers of justice. Judgment will arrive for the wealthy, for they already possess more than enough. Judgment will arise for the greedy feasters. They will become the hungry. Judgment will arise for those who are mirthful and careless in this world. They will know mourning and weeping. And judgment will arise for the special classes, the privileged, all of them, because through the ages these have listened to messengers of injustice. This speech gathered an entire group of people around Jesus in Galilee. And we know that there is the story of the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. Yeah, there's two stories. Feeding the multitude. And Jesus took the people who were attracted by his message, his healing work, his dealing with traumatized persons, and his vision of a better world, of this resurrection. This is Jesus describing the resurrection. It is that the resurrection is when the hungry are fed, when the poor are given a regime, a kingdom, when the poor are given hope and their suffering is alleviated. That is the resurrection. Jesus takes this group of people, this crowd of followers, thousands of them, and marches towards the city of Jerusalem. This is the Galilean Uprising. They are headed to Galilee. They are going to challenge the Roman rule of Jerusalem. Now, where Jesus lived in Galilee and where most of his life occurred in his ministry, there were Roman garrisons manned by centurions. The Romans occupied the land of Judea and the other Jewish homelands like Galilee and Samaria, and he occupied them and said, "You will serve us." And he essentially enslaved the entire population of this region to serve the Roman authority. And Pilate, you know who Pontius Pilate is, was set up as the governor of the city of Jerusalem, and all the wealth of the surrounding countryside was centered towards Jerusalem and then sent off to Rome. And Jesus and his Galilean Uprising movement said, we will not tolerate this anymore. We demand justice. We demand freedom. We demand liberation. We demand communism. Yes, I know they didn't use the word communism in the Gospels, but it's essentially there. Jesus enters Jerusalem on a donkey, which is a symbol of shalom, which is the Jewish word for wholeness and peace. He represents peace. He arrives in Jerusalem. He marches to the temple. He throws out the merchants in the temple, said, because you are turning the worship of God into thievery. You're stealing from those who are here because they have no hope, because they want hope. And you're robbing them. Get out of this temple. And from that moment on, the leaders of the city began to plot against Jesus and began to prepare to have him executed. You know all the stories, and I would recommend watching, the Godspell, the movie. If you really aren't familiar with the Gospels, it's pretty good. Jesus Christ Superstar is a whole other angle on the story of Jesus, the Gethsemane song, where Jesus said, why should I die? And the Gospels record that he said, let this cup pass from me. But Jesus stayed true to his vision and said, I am here for the liberation of all of the people of the world. Yes, the Jewish people, but everyone needs to be free of the Roman oppressor. And he entered the city of Jerusalem with his movement. And a few days later, he was executed on a cross, hung up between two thieves, and scorned. And that sets the stage for the resurrection. Now, the story is that Jesus' body was taken down by a rich benefactor of the Jesus movement named Joseph of Arimathea. The city of Arimathea doesn't exist. There is no city known as Arimathea. We don't know where this guy Joseph came from. Some scholars consider it a fictional character. Those scholars believe that Jesus' body was probably taken down off the cross and thrown into an open pit where all the other crucified rebels had been thrown. Essentially, though, what we know from this is that the body of Jesus was never discovered. We don't know what happened to it. Traditionally, Christianity has said that's because he was raised from the dead. Let's dig into that. We have this Galilean Uprising movement. They converge on the city of Jerusalem. Thousands of people following Jesus, demanding freedom from the Roman oppressors, demanding freedom from the Jewish collaborators with Rome. These are Jewish people asking for a Jewish liberation, and Jesus is saying, yes, let's not only liberate the Jewish people, let's liberate the entire world. All the poor, all the hungry, all the suffering, all the oppressed. That was that message he gave. It wasn't just for Jewish people, it was for everyone. But he ends up dead, crucified as a rebel, humiliated. His movement fell apart. Now, the first witnesses of the resurrection were women. And depending on which gospel you read, there were 2 or 3 or more women who went to this tomb where Joseph of Arimathea is said to have laid the body of Jesus. And they went there, and there was no body. And then they began to have visions that Jesus was alive. They had not remained dead, that he had risen up, that the valley of dry bones had come into focus in the life of Jesus, and Jesus began to move among them like the spirit of renewing life had moved among the dead bones in the valley of Ezekiel. And they began to believe that Jesus and his revolution were not dead, that Jesus was alive among them. And the women took this story back to Peter and Simon and other members of the organizers of the Jesus movement. And they began to tell the story that Jesus, I experienced Jesus. He was alive. And they began to tell one another, I experienced Jesus. Yes, he's still alive. He's not dead. He lives. Jesus lives. Now, whether you believe that there was a miracle that occurred to the body of Jesus in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and he was transformed into an immortal form that could pass through walls and that had the nail prints in the hands, as it describes in the book of John, if you believe all of that, great. You also need to believe that Jesus was a communist and that what they saw living among them was a communist revolutionary come back to life as a spirit among them. And they began to believe that he had called them to continue the radical mission of proposing to the world communism as a resurrection. I believe that we can live in resurrection faith, even if we don't believe that there was a miracle in the garden tomb. Doesn't matter. What matters is that Jesus was experienced alive by his earliest followers, and they told the story that the crucifixion of the messianic rebel Jesus, the communist rebel Jesus, that crucifying him made it possible for them to experience life from death, from a crucifixion to a resurrection. Anytime the movements of freedom, the movements for justice fail, anytime they are crushed by the authorities, we know that the spirit of freedom and life, the spirit of Jesus, the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King, the spirit of Karl Marx, the spirit of Vladimir Lenin, those spirits of revolution come back to life among us. And that, my friends, is what is in a resurrection. I'm going to read now from the book of Revelation, which is the last book in the Christian canon. I'm going to read from chapter 21, verses 1 to 5. And this is in the Message translation, which is a modern paraphrase. I, John, saw heaven and earth recreated. Gone was the first heaven. Gone was the first earth. Gone the sea. I saw a divine holy city of Jerusalem recreated, descending resplendent out of the skies, ready for God, as if it was the spouse of God on their wedding day. A voice thundered from the throne, "Look, look, Goddess has moved into our neighborhood, making her home with every human being. We and they are now the people of Goddess, the people of love, the people of communism, the people of the resurrection. Goddess shall wipe away every tear from every single eye. Crying and pain and death and disease are gone forever." That is what's in a resurrection. A world of transformative life, joy, justice, freedom, and peace, and love. That's what's in a resurrection. I'm going to close now with a couple of things. First, I'm going to close with another song. I really like to sing, and I know there's no background music, and that's going to be a bit annoying. But here we go. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. When I hear that trumpet sound, I'm gonna rise up out of the ground. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. Now look over Jordan. What do you think I see? I see a band of angels, and they're coming after me. Oh, ain't no grave can hold my body down. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. Ain't no grave can hold my or your or the world down. I believe in the resurrection as communism, as the transformation of the world. I'm going to close with a prayer. Yeah, I said it. Prayer. This is adapted from the Easter prayer by Kathleen Rowlands, who is a Unitarian Universalist minister. You may know I also am a Unitarian Universalist minister. In the spirit of resurrection, may we be reminded of the power of hope to triumph over fear, the power of love to prevail over the horrors of hate, the potential for justice to be victorious over injustice. We aim for a courageous and joyous faith, empowering us to become our finest and truest selves, empowering us to see the goddess image in every being, every living being, human and animal, and empowering us to participate in all the world of creation, in the creation of a new time of life in which love, justice, beauty, and peace are abundantly available to all. I want to thank you, everyone who has listened to this video to this point. I'm really kind of excited about it. Please consider subscribing to the Commie Preacher channel here on YouTube if you haven't done that yet. Ring the bell to get notified when there are more videos coming. Consider going to my Patreon page, which will be linked in the comments of this video or in the description of the video, if you would like to subscribe and support this ministry. I hope that this message has helped you understand a little bit about what a resurrection is for and why a resurrection needs to be communism.